Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. I am the Darklight Emissary, and today's episode continues our series on Legion battle doctrines and tactics. And today's episode is on the 13th Legion, the Warrior Kings of Ultramar, the Ultramarines Legion. This legion is, at its height, the most populous of all the legions, hovering at just about 250,000 Space Marines at their height during the Great Crusade, and into the Horus Heresy itself. This legion gained that strength by being one of the only legions to have a complete realm of planets to pull recruits from, as well as one of the most administratively powerful Primarchs in Robot Goleman. This legion hierarchy was about as rigid as they come in terms of who was in charge of what, super well organized, and to the point in its organization. However, it was a rigidity with a built-in flexibility by the Primarch, especially. They didn't change their structure much from the beginning structure that legions underwent in when they were deployed from Terra. However, the Primarch added a few more roles and specialities to his legion, and was able to adapt his legion according to studying his brother Primarch's ways of war. And so, even though the Ultramarines Legion is kind of seen in the modern era as the chapter as kind of the poster boys for Warhammer as a setting, and even though they are kind of seen as generic, they are really far from that in a lot of ways, especially compared to how they deal with war and politics during the Great Crusade. This legion was split up into 25 chapters, each which was commanded by a chapter master, numbering 10,000 in each of these chapters. So right there, we're looking at around that 250,000 mark. Each of these chapters were basically diversified further by captains commanding 1,000 warriors. And then you've got the normal squads, and each of these squads were basically diversified based upon need of a certain campaign during the Great Crusade. Now, one of the things about this, though, is some of these chapters and squads and companies would retain certain equipment over time and kind of become known as a specialist chapter. Some chapters had more armored units. Some were folded into basically known as Nemesis squads. And these were the ones that would carry with them the dreaded Devastator type weapons, like the Phosphex weapons, radiation weapons, all of the weapons that basically were used in Exterminatus and in the most hostile situations. However, these were used sparingly. One of the unique traits of this legion in its combat is that they would try their best not to destroy a world utterly or shatter the spirit of its populace. They often would leave a world better than how they found it, or at least bring it back to nominal capacity. Robout himself would pick a governor and better leadership, and sometimes he would even leave behind one of his ranking Space Marines in a powerful political position. He saw his Marines not just as tools of war, but tools of politics and state as well. One of the unique ranks in this legion was Tetrarch, which were basically 5 complete rulers over his kingdoms, for example. Beyond this, each of the Primarch's chapters, some of them had traits of some of the other legions because Robot Goleman made it a mission to study the other legions and then adopt tactics from them. He might have had a fairly rigid legion in terms of hierarchy and who answered to who, but he would often adapt the legion to different specific specialities based upon the needs of the chapters and the overall legion structure. He was not despite him eventually causing the Codex Astartes to be written, and that being followed to the letter by many chapters, during the Great Crusade at least, and in his legion, he was willing to adapt different parts of his legion to different battle modes, depending on the need. And he was willing to war game in specific ways. And during the Horus Heresy, he had a wargaming exercise where him and at least one of his chapters were actually playing the part of Horus and his legion against some loyalist Ultramarines. And they were using that to try to learn how best to fight Horus's legion. So they weren't, overly prideful to the point where they wouldn't try to imitate other legions and gain from their tactical acumen. All of this leads to the Ultramarines being one of the most ascendant legions. They had some of the most compliances during the Great Crusade and some of the most success with rebuilding worlds, because they would do what it took to bring a world up to a standard that Robot Guilliman himself instilled in his Marines, both in a almost humane way of the battle and also a way to bring value to the compliances that were coming into the Great Crusade. It wasn't enough to leave a smoking ruin, but to bring gleaming pillars and towers and a society that wanted to be there afterwards, which I tend to appreciate out of this. Thousand Sons were also kind of like this. I didn't exactly mention that. I mentioned their thirst for knowledge, but it should be noted that the Thousand Sons Legion tended to leave places better than they found them a lot of times. This legion did make use of Cataphractae, Terminator pattern armored squads, most notably one of them known as the Volmentaris Terminator Strike Squad. And this was actually inspired off of Perturabo and the Iron Warriors Legion. And so again, Robot saw the value in the Terminators as they were used by Perturabo, and he installed his Terminators to operate much like the Iron Warriors legionaries fought, as an example of that. One of the other unique traits of this legion in terms of troops is a faction called the Vigil Operati through this legion. And this was actually making use of regular human troops and augmented scouts within the Space Marine Legion. They were kind of like the Alpha Legion regular human operators, and that they would seek out and destroy threats to the 500 worlds within the kingdom itself. So they were spies, they were assassins, things like that, which was a little bit unusual to learn about the Ultramarines because they tend to actually sort of frown upon that. Robot Guilliman was no friend to Alpharius or the Alpha Legion, so just something kind of interesting about that. Due to the size of this legion, it was often spread amongst many expeditionary fleets. They did not operate as a monolith. And in fact, Robot Guilliman would send out leaders of this legion to help advise other legions and expeditionary forces. They would send out support squadrons to neighboring expeditionary fleets of other legions that would accept them. They were very well-rounded in that way. Armored-wise, this legion had basically limitless potential for armored combat. If they needed any sort of land raider support or super heavy support of any kind of tanks like Fellblades and things like that, this legion could produce and bring forth a armored wall of destruction towards any enemies that dared to defy their power in a combat theater operation. Despite the size of the overall legion, their actual fleet capabilities were a bit lesser on the super heavy, very powerful battleship and Gloriana class ships that some of the other legions had. However, they did have 2 of the Gloriana class battleships available to this legion at the time of the Great Crusade. Perhaps more unusually than some of the legions, which were more insular and carried a lot of their mostly own troop transports and ships, the Ultramarines tended to make use a lot more of a direct Imperial Navy battleships and transports to get their Marines to different theaters of war, as well as captaining some of those ships themselves, more so than you would maybe see in other legions. And so that's a little bit about the Legion doctrines and overall structure of the Ultramarines Legion. As always, please leave a comment if you'd like to correct anything in this video or add more about this Legion, or leave a comment requesting any future topics. You can always subscribe if you want to hear more from me on this or other topics, and I hope that you enjoy the time here on this video and future videos, as well as any of my past ones that I've done so far. The next legion up is going to be the 12th Legion, which is the World Eaters Legion next, and they should be a fun one to talk about. As always, bring your light into the dark places. I hope you have a great day or night wherever you are, and thank you for your time. Talk to you soon.